Okay, thank you so much for being here today, everybody. It's really wonderful to see a lot of faces who I'm familiar with, a lot of people who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I really appreciate you taking the time and energy to come and join us today. This morning's panel was a little intimidating for me, so I'm gonna do my best. I love our three panelists this morning with myself, and so Jamie Hood, who is the Associate Director and the Native Arts Curator at the Hood Museum, Sonia Clark, who's an educator and a tremendous artist who I've followed her work for many years, and I think we have a lot in common. And Alexandra Bokel, who is the the Director of Creative Excellence, Material Excellence at LVMH, who I collaborated with on a project over the past year and a half. So we're gonna have a chance to talk about that. We're super excited to talk about beads. I love that there are other people who are equally as obsessed about beads and embellishment as I am, and who also understand that there are social and political and economical implications to these beautiful things that many of us adorn ourselves with, but also collect and pay attention to. So I wish they could talk and tell us their stories. I think it would be brilliant to see what other bodies they've been on. And so I'm gonna let our panelists introduce themselves. So we're gonna start with Jamie Powell.
Gosh. Okay. Oh no, Sonia's our first. Oh, we're gonna do the close your eyes thing. Or should we just go, should we switch?
Maybe let's just switch.
Yeah, let's just switch. You go first. Yeah, why not? It's the theme of our panel.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you. I am deeply grateful for this radical inclusivity. And I'm so deeply grateful to you, Jeffrey, and so proud of you and your team for the work that you've done here. So what a wonderful thing that we get to gather around this. I want to tell you that my gratitude, I'm just grateful to be a recipient of this capacious generosity. Jeffrey was talking about it yesterday, about this kind of inclusivity. And so in the spirit of full disclosure, you should know I am not Native, I am not an Indigenous scholar, I am a deep lover of beads. I could speak to you for the next 4 weeks about beads. I promise I will not do that. I am the daughter of parents who came from the Caribbean, so descendants of people who were forcibly migrated to the Americas. And I think because of that, and because of this connection that I feel with my Indigenous brothers and sisters of how they stole your land and then they made us work it, right? So there's something about that I think can also come together in beadwork. So I am an artist who deeply believes in the power of beads and their power to hold history and metaphor and possibility. I realized that I left my phone down there, so I need someone to, can you just hand it to me? So about 10 minutes from now, I'm gonna stop talking. Okay. So I come to you with this love of beads and the love of their ability to hold stories and hold histories and also speak truth to power while being beautiful, right? Like what they are art themselves. And so I am going to, in 3 slides, show you, because Jeffrey asked me to do this, he said, can you show just a couple of slides to kind of root our conversation. And the images that I'm gonna show you, the first is, maybe we can get to that one. Oh, am I doing it? Ha-ha! Look at the power I have. So the first image is of 3 images, because I cheated. You did too. So the images you see on the right is of a gentleman from the Akan people in Ghana. Is an Ashanti person. He's wearing a garment that is often called a warrior's or hunter's cloth garment. It's covered with amulets like the one that my best friend, Franklin Gilliam, gave me. These are power packets. They hold medicine in them to keep you safe and to heal you. He is covered with ones that have been passed down generationally. The top right is, because I'm speaking to you in this colonized language, I just want to tell you that beads literally mean prayer. Do you know that? Yeah, some of you are nodding. It's from the word bidan, which we get bid or bet from, like I bid you well, right? And it's because beads were used as memory devices by those who practice the Catholic faith and other faiths that have rosaries as letting you know where you are in your prayer cycle. So beads are prayers. The other thing that I have to tell you as I'm standing here before you is that I am not in the singular standing here before you. I am very aware that in just 20 generations back, there are 2,072,576 people that got together to make this Sonia Clark that is standing here before you. And that capaciousness and strength and power is something that I walk with all the time. So bringing these two things together, this idea of beads as prayer, this idea of these power packets as medicine, one of the things that I did early in my life as an artist in 1997, I started a project called the Beaded Prayers Project. I wondered how we could gather as many people as possible in a space with medicine and their presence. And so in the middle of the slide just previously, you saw my family holding these little packets that they had made that contained wishes, hopes, dreams, or prayers, and then were stitched with a double beaded edge stitch, which is a stitch I learned from studying indigenous beadwork, stitching those shut to hold that power. And so this is a work that often gets attributed to me because I started it. I didn't make amulets. Human beings have been making them for a long time. I didn't make these packets. I didn't make the idea of beadworks or the idea of beads as medicine, none of that. I just brought all of those things together and brought thousands of people together. So to date, and it's an ongoing project, over 6,000 people have participated. I swear to you that when you stand in the space, you feel the presence of all of those people. And like the Akan man who is wearing the hunter's or warrior's cloth garment that is passed down generationally, this piece becomes the architecture holds our bodies in that space, the presence of all of those people. So I'm a chorus of all the ancestors who have made me. But this artwork is also a chorus of all of those who have participated in this project. This is the capacity of beads. This is one of the things that it can do. Now, I want to go to this idea of beads themselves as amulets. I think about, when I first started studying beadwork, I was looking at, I think then maybe they said beads were about 75,000 years old. And some of the earliest beads were found in the Bolombos caves in what is now known as South Africa. And much more recently, they found beads in caves in Morocco that are 150,000 years old. Now, these are not glass beads like the ones that we were using for the Beaded Prayers Project or the ones that my friend Jeffrey beautifully uses, but they were shell beads, right? How do we know that they were beads? Well, the string that is holding them together is long gone. But the arrangement of them indicated that they were at one point strung. The other thing is that they had holes drilled in them. And I always think about this thing, like human beings are such strange creatures, right? You decide that something is so important to you, and you want to have it close to you. 150,000 years ago, there weren't pockets. That's a joke. because we're going to be talking about fashion. They were in pockets. Those of you who know, like, a dress without pockets is not even a dress, right? There weren't pockets. So how did you take something that you know is holding your story, your power, medicine, it's protecting you, all the things that beads can do, all the things that an object, a handheld object can do, how do you put it on your body? You put that thing at risk by drilling a hole in it so you can string it and keep it closed. So the very definition of what a bead is anything that has a hole in it, anything that can be strung, anything. That means this architecture has a hole in that door and that door. This room that we're in is a bead. It means each one of you and all your many ancestors, you're beads. I mean, I don't mean to be too specific, but you eat and then you're a bead. Right. The other thing that I will say is that the way that we see and know each other is through all the holes that are in our bodies, our eyes, our mouths, our ears. We take in the world through the holes that we have in our bodies, right? We make new generations with the holes that we have in our bodies, right? All of this becomes a metaphor for what beads can be, right? How they hold our stories, how this precious little thing that we've decided we make it into a bead so we can hold it close. The next image that I want to share with you is of a Lukasa. Lukasa are from the Luba people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Have any of you seen this kind of image before? Some of you maybe, no? I should also tell you that one of the reasons I started doing beadwork when I was a young professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is that I was commuting between Wisconsin and my beloved lived in Maryland. And for those of you who don't know the United States, this is far. And so mainly my studio practice was now in an airplane, and I needed something very portable, right? So I've always thought about the power of beads is that they are portable. They can build into magnificent artworks that you wouldn't carry. But they have this portability. You don't need much to do beadwork. You need a bead, a needle, and a thread. That's it. If you want, you could have a cloth to stitch those onto, but just a bead, a needle, and a thread. My whole studio could fit in something this big, right? And nail clippers, because they wouldn't let you take scissors on the plane. So for a long time, this idea of thinking how much can be at our fingertips, how much knowledge there can be held and transferred in our fingertips, this is an old way of understanding that in the same way that we are beads in all our holes and capacities to understand and feel and be with each other, the beads themselves reflect that. They have sound, they have touch, they have all of these ways of expressing themselves, telling us their presence and being with us, like us, with us. The Lukasa from the Luba people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is right now a place that is being ravaged by the greed of colonial extraction and subjugation. It is one of the places that has more cobalt on this earth than anywhere else. It's why we even have these handheld devices. And what I'm sharing with you from the Luba people are a handheld device called a Lukasa that is made from the wood of the land. And then on it are these beads that are nailed into that wood. And then the griot touches and reads these stories and histories. And the stories are not fixed like the way that a text might be fixed. The stories can also be mutable and change in the moment, but it's a memory device. Rosary is a memory device. These beads are used as a memory device. So I'm hoping as we're talking, we'll talk about beads and memory as well. And I just think like the wisdoms that get lost or repressed or erased or subjugated. When colonizers come into indigenous space and say you are less than we are, right? And then somehow we take this handheld device and years later we have this thing. And then we're going back and ravaging these places so we can make these things. But so I find that the Lukasa become this wonderful place to think about indigenous wisdoms that must be held onto, recovered, reclaimed, and to take their power back. Finally, because it's been 10 minutes, and we have plenty more to discuss, I want to go back to this idea of reminding you that you are beads. When the griot looks out, and I'm not a griot, but when the griot is looking out on the people who are gathered to hear him speak, either him or her, speak about the stories that hold the people to the land and hold the people to one another, they're gathered like you are. You are literally beaded on this wooden floor. We work better together when we understand that we have this fullness of who we are and all of those ancestors that we embody. I like to say, as an artist, it is my aim, my goal, my job to add to the ancestral archive, right? But I think that's everybody's responsibility. Like, what are you adding to your ancestral archive? What are you highlighting? And then as I'm pushing forth this memory, this metaphor that each of us are beads, how are we seeing each other? How are we with each other? How are we collected together? And how does that help us do this work of adding to the ancestral archive? And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my dear friend, Jamie Powell. Thank you.
That woman had the audacity to tell me not to be too fabulous because we thought I was presenting before her, and wow. Oh my gosh, that was amazing. You made talking about holes in our body sound elegant. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Powell. I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation, and I serve as the Associate Director for Curatorial Affairs and Curator of Indigenous Art at the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College. It is really an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm so grateful to Jeffrey and also to Kathleen and Abigail and Christian and the larger team of folks who created this space for us to be here today. And I wanted to start on a reflection of the last panel and thinking about, the idea of the space in which to place me as the intellectual space which has been created for us, through this convening, and the idea that, what we're doing here and why none of us have really prepared something formal, but we're kind of pulling on these threads, that we've heard throughout different conversations, is really because this is, the opening of an intellectual space and a space to kind of grapple with complexity and to have conversations that are really essential in our field. And in this moment in particular, when, we are on as Phil earlier was talking about kind of the plateaus and the cyclical nature of how Native art has, has existed within, kind of mainstream art markets. I think a lot of us are seeing that this is not going away, right? That there's no ebb, right? But this growth in the flow of interest, and this is a moment for us to kind of seize that and to really kind of center Indigenous ways of knowing and ideas like coalition building, which came up in the last panel, to really kind of center Black and Indigenous and, other marginalized communities in art histories and in, histories that we've otherwise been excluded from. And that, that is not only about representation, but it's really about, kind of how do we move forward as humans in a place that is really complicated and kind of awful right now. And, I think, I always look to artists. It's why I've, kind of centered my practice around the work of artists, is because their intellectual generosity and the hope and joy that they bring to our lives through their work, and the ways that they help us imagine possible futures. And I think I see that, at a place like Dartmouth, where I work at a museum and I get to teach young people through works of art, and to kind of triangulate conversations to help them enter into a space of discomfort and ambiguity, and to be able to sit with that and grapple with it. And that's kind of what we're doing here in this space together. So I wanted to start with this slide of a work of Jeffrey's that's in the Hoods collection, and to talk about the way that, his work demonstrates something that came up on the last panel too, which is the spaces of greatest limitation have always been places where our communities have found a place to create, and to build futures for us that we take on today. And just as Sonia was just saying, building on that ancestral archive, that, these objects hold knowledge. And Jeffrey is, drawing on this materiality and the knowledge that these materials hold, even though many of them are, new materials that were, created and produced on a commercial scale, using them to reference these long-standing ancestral practices, and all of the knowledge and strength that is embedded within them. But also the way in this particular piece, he's drawing on kind of the natural world through the inclusion of this driftwood as, kind of the structure that holds this piece up, and connects us to place and land. But in the words, what do you want, when do you want it, using pop culture, I think the humor and pop culture and civil rights references within his work are, incredibly generous and allow other people into these spaces, but also kind of disrupt this notion that Native people exist outside of the mainstream and aren't kind of privy to mainstream pop culture. So this is a picture, and there's two of them. The second one's better. But, kind of the history, a visual history and chart of the global bead trade, and it's by the scholar Lois Dubin. And this shows, it's a textbook called The History of Beads, and there's not even a tripartite fold out, but it's like 4 pages that folds out and has this incredible visual map and timeline of the beads from all over the globe. And as Sonia was saying, we as humans all have this connection to beads. And I think that is why so many people can find resonance in Jeffrey's work and the work of, other artists who are kind of drawing on this material legacy that, is something that we still do in our own lives today, right? And, it's in fashion, and it's in, kind of the way that we wear earrings, and it's, kind of permeated all these different parts of our lives, no matter what community you're from. And so, I don't know, this is just a great resource. If you are into beads, you should read this book. Went too fast. Okay, so I wanted to set up a little bit about kind of the history of beadwork and kind of think about how beadwork as a practice becomes a metaphor for this concept I've used in my research that I did with Jean Dennison, but also drawing on scholarship of folks like Jolene Rickard, who was on the first panel, Achille Mbembe, and Nicholas Thomas, which is called Colonial Entanglement. And as a visual metaphor, so my initial research, actually let me back up a little bit, was focused on the practice of Osage ribbon work and the legacy of my great-grandmother, Georgianne Gray Robinson, who was both a renowned ribbon work artist and a small business owner, but also the first female vice president for the National Congress of American Indians. And I was really interested in this concept of visual sovereignty and intellectual sovereignty, which came up on the first panel as well, as a means to talk about the contributions of Native women to nation-building projects and how the work of men in our communities, because of the ways that, colonial understandings of gender dynamics and power have been internalized within many of our communities, the work of men in nation building is recognized in scholarship in ways that the work of women has not been. And so, using these histories that exist in the material histories of clothing in my own community is a way to kind of demonstrate the power of Native women and how, often this is through our children. So thinking about, two of the examples here are cradle boards. And any of you who have ever done beadwork or can think about, the thousands and thousands of beads that are on these objects that a baby would use for a year, maybe a little bit more, demonstrates the care of women for their children, not only as mothers, but in recognition of children as the future of our nations, right? So the contribution of these material histories is part of a nation-building project. I also wanted to show all of these to demonstrate the kind of multiplicity and diversity of form and design. And you can see there's more abstract and geometric patterns, but also floral patterns. There's examples of Haudenosaunee beadwork, raised beadwork that Jolene Rickard via her husband Tim talked about this morning. But just to show that even in this kind of one form or practice of Native American beadwork, that there's this great diversity, and this is just a small sampling of that work. Back to colonial entanglements. As a visual metaphor, it's incredibly useful, and it's, kind of the ways that in picking up the materials, both those torn apart by colonial processes and those created by it, and literally stitching them into their own original patterns and using them for their own purposes, Native people and women in particular have creatively and artistically formed the tangled ribbons of colonialism into their own statements of sovereignty. Beadwork and other material, cultural, and political practices remind us that it is possible to create new and powerful forms out of ongoing colonial processes. As Indigenous people are taking the entangled threads of settler colonialism and stitching, beading, and weaving them into new forms that are unique to our own communities, we can see the kind of worlding that's happening through the creation of these objects. One last thing I wanted to talk about with this slide is specifically around kind of the historical context of kind of the origins of beadwork and the use of glass beads within the North American context. And I think it's, many people have touched upon how significant it is that we're here in Venice, this place that is so important to the, kind of trade of glass beads throughout the world. So the origins of beadwork are certainly tied to Indigenous engagement in 18th century consumer revolution, and Native peoples traded and incorporated beads into our lives. This happened well before the arrival of settlers. Prior to the establishment of colonial trade networks, Native women ornamented clothing with highly valued and prized materials such as paints, shell beads, dentalia, elk teeth, and other items through wide-ranging intertribal and international trade. So the Indigenous involvement in this trade preceded the arrival of Europeans, and framing beadwork or other practices as a simple reaction to Western imposition diminishes the importance of previously existing aesthetic, social, and economic processes. And I think that's one of the things that we're able to talk about, through this broad interest in contemporary use of beads within Native artwork, to bring it back to these kind of historical conversations and really locating that context and helping to have these more complex and layered conversations. These are some examples of contemporary beadwork pieces that I've collected in my time at the Hood. One by Jamie Okuma, A Pair of Boots. Another piece by Summer Peters, which is a depiction of Maria and Marjorie Tallchief, two Osage prima ballerinas, and a beaded bag by Ken Williams Jr. That was inspired by a bag of cotton candy and a historical photograph. And one thing that I hope we'll talk about, Jeffrey, is, and we've had this conversation before, which is, kind of the difference between this type of beadwork and your use of beads in your pieces. And so I'll end on that slide and just, kind of think about the way that you are drawing on these material histories and this legacy of beadwork, but you're doing it on a scale and in a manner that is not replicating that work, but rather bringing that work into a new dialogue. And I think, one of the challenges that we have in the contemporary art market today, and as people who are not kind of privy to these histories, who are writing about your work, which is wonderful, is that they will often contextualize your work and say that like what you're doing is the same as what other beadwork artists are doing, and it's really something different, right? So they're flattening this experience, and so how do we share this deeper knowledge and history and context within which you're working, so people understand that complexity. And I think I've got like notes that I was writing by hand, and then I like typed something on my computer and I didn't even read it. I don't know. I think there's room for lots of other dialogue, but I'll just end with the fact that, I think the opportunity for us to kind of work together and center art and creativity in, kind of how to bring hope to spaces and places which don't feel hopeful in our current moment is wonderful. And as we kind of have been here together, I've just like felt really energized and excited about the work ahead. And it's, something that I hadn't been feeling for quite a while. So I'm really grateful to be here with all of you and to continue the dialogue.
So I think. Okay, I also want to introduce Dieter Rollstrata, who is going to be serving as a volunteer translator when needed. So thank you. So I was going to show some slides of a collaboration that I did with Christian Dior, and Alexandra was I refer to you as this materials engineer, but that's not correct. But do you want to introduce yourself in any way before?
Yeah, sure. I am going to speak in French, but anyway, you tell me. Moi, j'ai un parcours un peu bordélique. C'est-à-dire que j'ai fait des études en physique nucléaire. Ce qui n'a aucun rapport avec ce que j'ai fait après. Et j'ai étudié les sciences politiques et je me suis retrouvé dans la mode.
So my trajectory has been bordelic. That's interesting. Slightly, well, not exactly opposite. Promiscuous. That's my trajectory has been rather promiscuous. I was trained, in fact, as a nuclear scientist, a nuclear physicist, which obviously does not have anything to do with what I do now.
Et donc aujourd'hui, j'ai deux casquettes, two hats. Et la première, je suis directeur des métiers d'excellence pour LVMH. Alors ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que mon travail, c'est de transmettre les savoir-faire du patrimoine aux nouvelles générations. Chez LVMH, on a des métiers qui sont les couturiers, les maroquiniers, les horlogers, les brodeurs, les gens qui font des tissus, de la dentelle. Et ces métiers n'intéressent plus du tout les jeunes générations. Et donc ma mission, c'est dans le monde entier de faire tout ce qu'on peut pour monter des écoles et transmettre les savoir-faire.
So today I wear two hats, and the first hat is one as the director as the director who oversees the transmission of crafts, very old, ancient artisanal traditions to a younger generation of students. I do this in my capacity as someone who works for LVMH, which is one of the great luxury concerns, and that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. And so these traditions of craftsmanship are of no longer such great interest to a younger generation of makers, but this is exactly what I want to make sure survives the onslaught of disinterest in many ways, and this includes lace making, embroidery, etc.
Et la seconde casquette, et c'est comme ça que j'ai rencontré Jeffrey, je travaille pour Dior et ma mission, c'est de rencontrer des artistes dans le monde pour les inviter à travailler sur le Lady Dior. Et donc, en fait, je passe mon temps à voyager. Je suis arrivé il y a 1 heure et je repars bientôt à Shanghai pour rencontrer des artistes et commencer un dialogue créatif avec eux. On ne sait jamais trop où on s'embarque, mais c'est toujours des très beaux voyages.
So the second hat I wear for Christian Dior, the fashion label, and that's the job that allowed me to meet Jeffrey Gibson, who is one of many artists that, in my capacity as a person working in that position, I get to meet all around the world. And this is, of course, a very kind of exciting and unpredictable life. You've been here about an hour, and you're about to leave for Shanghai next, not in an hour, I hope, but to meet more contemporary artists to embark on collaborations with.
Voilà, et jusqu'à présent, moi je déteste compter, parce que comme je suis quelqu'un de passionné, je ne compte jamais les choses. Mais quand même, j'ai fait l'exercice et j'ai travaillé avec 160 artistes différents en 10 ans. Voilà, dont Jeffrey 2 times. Mais j'ai travaillé avec Jeff Koons, avec Richard Prince, avec Takashi Murakami, Damien Hirst. Donc voilà, beaucoup d'artistes passionnants.
So I hate counting, but I did keep account of the amount of artists, the number of artists that I've worked with in the past up until the present, and the total is 160. And I believe Jeffrey Gibson perhaps twice, right? So that would be 159 or 161. Anyway, among artists I've worked with are Jeff Koons, Damien Hirst, etc. So, the big guns.
Okay, thank you. The project that we worked on was for the Lady Dior series, and I just wanted to start here. So Lady Dior series is they commission artists to come in and kind of reinvent this bag. And I had been working with beadwork in many of the ways that you've seen of my work. And one of my interests for a very long time, of course, has been the comparison between indigenous handwork and beadwork in particular, but also ribbon work and applique work, weaving, and why the economy of it, the value of it, hasn't held the same kind of growth as other kinds of handwork globally. And especially because I know from my experience and from knowing beadworkers, it is very much along the lines of what couturiers do in terms of the artisanal handwork that goes into things and the amount of time that it takes. So, and also an interest in fashion, I think, is something, and fashion in the kind of broadest sense. Like I'm very much drawn to the things that are not fast fashion, the things that are actually kind of more impractical and fall out of the economy that we live in. And I think so. That's its own topic. I know maybe we'll get into, But I think when it comes to Native American beadwork, and I don't know how many people can relate to this, but it comes with a lot of responsibility. And sometimes that responsibility can be very intimidating as someone who's making things, because there's a lot of things, protocols and ownership, and you want to avoid appropriation. And so it can be a difficult path sometimes to take risks within. I think when I met Alex, here's Alex, who, as far as I know, you knew nothing about Native American beadwork. Yeah, and just this really kind of infectious energy of inventiveness with materials. And so I made, this was actually one of the first designs. This is a Photoshop file of what we sent. And this is all made on Photoshop, and so literally working with a template that we use in the studio, drop color in, and different from what we use in the studio, where we have a set palette of beads that we work from, which is probably about 22 colors. In this, when you go into the fashion realm, they can make any color bead you want. So your palette opens up into this infinite kind of spectrum. I guess I have to point it over here. There we go. So this is the actual bag that was produced. This is the first one. And it may not seem like, what was interesting is when I went to go see you in New York to look at the initial samples, I thought I was going to look at like 2-inch by 2-inch pieces. And they had each, I don't know, met 4 or 5 full bag fronts to look at. And it was these really minor distinctions between the beadwork that suddenly started shifting it away from the traditions of Native American beadwork that I was familiar with. In this one, it's a mix. I think these are all plastic beads. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a mix,
glass and plastic. And Alex really just sort of, I think, stayed true to my original design, but there was these little tweaks of using larger beads, wrapping them over top of each other to get this kind of texture. And the fabric on the side is a sports fabric, and then the interior is a bright yellow leather. This turquoise handle that has also been beaded in what I think of as this kind of mod 60s kind of handle. So very much in the way that I identify as a collage artist, I feel like this bag also is very much a collage of different references. And then with the Dior letters on the side, these are 3D scanned beads that have been printed. So I guess, one of my questions in listening to people today is sort of these traditions and this lineage that we're talking about, thinking about the future, technology, fashion. Certainly I would say I've seen more Indigenous fashion designers in the last 2 years than I think I've seen in my whole entire life. And thinking about what the future of fashion is going to look like coming from Indigenous designers, what does the kind of freedom to create and invent and remake and reference, how is that going to allow, I think, for what a future might look like, or what it might be made of, or even how it's spoken about? This is the other bag that was made. I call this like a kind of granny goes to a rave bag. And this piece, this face here, which was really interesting. So this was a hand beaded face that we did in another artwork, which I'm going to show the artwork. So the nose is a stone, which I believe was 3D printed.
Yeah.
It's a 3D printed stone because there's about 150 bags made. And then the shell, which is the mouth, was also 3D printed. And so the 3D printing, and then they're painted to look like the shell or the stone. But they really stayed true. And also the actual original face is probably about 150%, 130% larger than the one that's on the bag. So that was also incredible. And then these like wacky handles of like blue crystal is also, and this is like this little bag. It's not that big. It's about like this, but it's such a statement. It's such a statement bag. let me see, we can also go back into these. So that's the original face. So you can see they really stayed true to really what we sent. And I think most of that, you guys came to the studio? Yeah. Yeah, so you came to the studio and saw them. And this is a larger painting. Okay, so most recently, there is a third bag. And this was a punching bag that was made, I believe, in 2017-ish. The title of the bag is Love is the Drug. These are jingles on the bottom. There's all of these heart charms that are sewn onto the center, and then this beadwork pattern of hearts, interlocking hearts in the top. And then Love is the Drug is what wraps around. So the way some of these things will go into a bag, this is the most recent one. So this is one that was, I think once I had kind of learned the process of how things work, and then also that working with Alex and with Dior, they were very much supportive of like, tell us what you want to make, and we'll help you figure out how to make it. So this is, I think these are 3D printed. I think it's about 80 charms that were printed in order to make this bag, and then it's fully beaded on the backside there. So I think, I mean, I have to admit, I almost felt like, knowing I was talking with Sonia and Jamie, feeling like, oh, I'm going to show handbags, and but then I thought, you know, I think my hesitation in wanting to take the handbags is serious. You know, I'm of a generation that representation and inclusion really have been my pursuit. And I think placing myself in unexpected places in hopes that it broadens the possibilities for others also has been very much my pursuit. I'm really proud of the bags. I've really enjoyed the process of working with you and working with everybody at Dior. And I believe this is correct. I don't think I'm making a mistake, but I believe one of these is entering into a Native Arts collection, which is an interesting thing to cross over, to bring, you know, one of the things I enjoy doing also in this kind of collage pursuit is bringing together different narratives that otherwise wouldn't come together. So, so that to me is very exciting. Okay, I'm gonna see, do you have anything you want to add?
Je peux raconter quelque chose que Jeffrey ne sait pas, que what you don't know, basically. C'est que quand on a reçu les premiers dessins chez Dior, moi je dois toujours, ma mission, c'est d'essayer de comprendre ce que veut l'artiste. Donc d'essayer de voir le dessin et de le traduire en 3D.
So the first challenge, and I'm not even sure if I've mentioned this to Jeffrey even, but the first challenge that I work with is the challenge of translating an artist's design into the reality of these objects.
Et pour Jeffrey, c'est très compliqué. Il faut savoir que les artistes, en général, font toujours référence soit à quelque chose de très géographique, soit quelque chose de très historique. Donc dans ma tête, j'ai toujours les périodes des années 60, 70, 80, 90, africains, asiatiques, européens. Et normalement, j'ai juste à tirer un tiroir et à recomposer la broderie.
When artists make reference to a very wide range of possible worlds that, you know, have a very kind of wide historical range, different decades, different centuries, different continents, African, European, American, and so this is the first thing that I have to kind of learn to understand.
Et avec Jeffrey, c'était impossible de faire ça, parce que c'était en soi, mon cerveau, même si j'ai fait de la physique nucléaire, il était en burn-out total, parce que je ne comprenais pas à quoi il faisait référence. C'est-à-dire que quand je voyais le dessin, je voyais des choses qui étaient à la fois très couture européenne, très aussi africaine, très américaine, et des palettes de couleurs qui étaient un peu rave, Coachella, que j'arrivais pas à comprendre.
Yeah. So the problem, or the challenge of working with Jeffrey is that the references didn't make sense to me at all. You know, no matter no matter whether I have a brain trained for nuclear physics or not. I just could not make sense of this, intricate constellation of references. There's a little bit of everything, a little bit of African and a little bit of European, a little bit of traditional and historical, but then there's rave culture, there's, all these African, American associations. So for me, I couldn't, really make sense of this design at all in a way that was completely different of what I had encountered in the past.
Et c'était très drôle parce qu'on a fait les premiers essais avec des ateliers de haute couture. Et je dirigeais l'atelier de haute couture à l'époque. Et il y a une brodeuse qui m'a dit, en fait, c'est pas une broderie classique, c'est une broderie inclusive. Dans le sens où elle inclut dans son langage des éléments qui viennent de tous les langages de l'histoire de la broderie.
So, this is reference to embroidery, right? Yeah, exactly. So my experience of working on these designs is that I learned that the embroidery was uniquely inclusive in its historical range and its historical reach. It did not reference a single kind of historical narrative, but many historical threads at the same time, and that's what made the embroidery pattern so challenging and also so gratifying.
Et ce qui était assez intéressant, c'est que pour la deuxième collaboration, maintenant que je connaissais Jeffrey, j'ai compris qu'il fallait lui montrer les choses les plus extrêmes de mon territoire. C'est-à-dire que j'ai été montrer des choses très couture traditionnelles et des choses complètement crazy and voilà, under acid to me. Et en fait, c'était assez drôle parce que plus je lui amenais des choses extrêmes et plus il les prenait. Donc c'était un vrai plaisir.
So the joy of working on this design was that it forced me to explore the extremes of my territory, so to speak, right? The extremes of haute couture sophistication, but then also the extremes of a certain kind of visual insanity, which I didn't know I could navigate so comfortably.
That's good. I didn't know that. You never shared. So I'm going to ask Jamie and Sonia to come back up and join us, and we're going to open up a conversation between all of us. So Dieter's going to hop down to the end, and then if you guys want to take those seats there, that'd be great.
Walked in front of the camera. I said I wasn't going to do that.
Oh, sorry. So maybe why don't we just start maybe with Sonia, with you, if you started us off. So if you want to start with any additional thoughts or observations. I know we covered a lot here.
Hello, can you hear me? First of all, thank you so much. I love this range of things.
Yeah.
You notice that I mentioned pockets because I knew we were going to fashion. I just want you to know that I did that just for you, Alex. So I do want to get to this place of beads and memory, which I brought up. But before I even do that, I realized that I have to do this other thing. I was supposed to introduce myself. You know, my name is Sonia Clark, but I did not tell you that I'm a professor at Amherst College. That's done. Amherst College, Western Massachusetts, very small liberal arts college, like Bard College. Right, okay, done. I'm interested in the way that perhaps we can talk about how we remember through beads and how that maybe even is connected to these pocketbooks as well, to these purses, as memories of this moment and this time in fashion. They're marking something in space and time, and I do believe that they are adding to this ancestral archive as well. I really do, yeah.
I would agree only because, I get a bag each time. So I have 3 beautifully boxed handbags that I take out like a very precious object. And when they came to photograph at the studio, my kids were there, and they came over and they were like, "I want this one." And they're just like swinging it around the studio, and I'm like, "Put it back." But I realized that really they're for them. These bags are for my children, and I was like, I just gave you the best bragging rights ever in 20 years when you're like, "Oh, this is my vintage Dior bag that my dad designed in 24." No, but seriously, and I won't touch them. These are truly for them, and I think, especially with thinking about like the way gender is changing and the way we're thinking about gender changing. My son, this is the one that he's like, this one's mine, and I was like, you can totally pull it off, and you know, it's like if you come back and you tell me that's for you, yeah, that'll be for you. So I think, and I do think also, you know, my hope in thinking about these kinds of collaborations, hopefully grow. You know, we see it happening, and in the beginning of those happenings, there's always going to be stumbles and, you know, criticisms and things like that. But I think it's important that we endure through them. You know, there's been a number of collaborations of large designers working with Native artists in the past few years, and one of the things that I love about Native artisanal handwork, oftentimes let's look at weaving, is it's impossible for it to be mass produced. You can't get the same quality, and even at an incredibly high price point, it just can't be made fast enough if it's going to be made by hand. You know, the wool can't be, you know, carded fast enough in order for that to happen. And not only that, but each one is going to be different. If you're just using natural wool, for instance, you're going to get these variations that are going to happen. So I love the way that it kind of inherently counters mass production. I also understand the luxury goods aspect is another conversation, but I think countering mass production is a really valid pursuit.
So I have another thing to say. You're making me also think about, in the college and university context, the anxiety over AI. And I teach beading classes, and I'm like, it just won't touch anything that I'm teaching them. They need a bead, a needle, and a thread. AI won't help them at all, right? So I love that that's also connecting to this as well. Yeah.
Let's talk more about pockets.
Also, these are like beaded prayers, these bags, to me.
Yeah. So I have this theory that's not mine alone, but that if women's fashion had pockets, we would rule the world, and that's why our clothing has never had pockets as standard, and men have all of these pockets all of the time, and that's really what's keeping us down. But thinking about like the handbag, and Jeffrey, I love that you brought up the point that, you know, as you know, gender is now seen as a spectrum, you know, more broadly by more people globally, that, you know, you see more and more men carrying tote bags and purses and what the
I don't know.
they used to, like a merce. It's not a merce anymore, right? It's not a joke anymore. It's you know, an actual thing. But you know that these are like really precious and of themselves. But the reason that like handbags and purses were created, and even, you know, historically, there were these places to keep our most prized possessions. And as you were moving, it was like a space of protection and a space of like, what do I consider the most important that I want to take with me? But then they were adorned. And, you know, in talking about kind of beads as knowledge keepers and memory devices, right? That adornment actually tells a story on the outside and serves as a protection of the things inside. And so it's, you know, this like both, like it's at once practical, but also a metaphor for the care and, you know, preciousness of the stories, and then what's, you know, kind of contained within inside.
So I want to say one more thing about that, because you made me think, when I was talking about you take something precious, you make a hole in it so you can carry it with you, right? That's what a bead is, right? If it's not a glass bead, a natural material bead. And then these are, what precious thing are you going to put in this thing that is covered with all of these precious things, right? And then there's such long history of that. But as a button said, not the one I have on. Oh, that's upside down. My button's upside down. But past and future equal present, right? Yeah, so there's something really wonderful about the way that you're describing these for your son and your daughter as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Non, je voulais rajouter aussi une chose, c'est sur cette communauté que créent ces perles. Parce que pour faire un sac comme celui-là, par exemple, c'est pas une personne qui a fait ça, c'est une communauté d'hommes et de femmes, c'est des brodeurs et des brodeuses qui ont travaillé ensemble. Et en fait, c'est assez beau ce qui se passe à chaque fois sur ça, parce que avant de se lancer sur le sac, ils échangent ensemble pour partager le même langage. Et ce sac de Jeffrey Gibson est devenu, le temps de quelques mois, leur langue naturelle. Et donc ça a créé des liens entre eux. Et je trouve ça assez beau aussi dans l'idée de parler des perles comme d'un élément de lien entre les gens, qu'autour de ce sac, il y a eu 17 personnes qui ont créé une communauté. Donc moi, quand je vois ce sac, en fait, je vois 17 personnes qui ont travaillé dessus.
So when I look at this bag, I see 17 people the 17 people, the 17 men and women and persons, the individuals who were involved in the production of this object. So that, for me, in many ways, is one of the great appeals of doing this work, that you constitute this impromptu community of makers. And that's also why I respond strongly and enthusiastically to this notion of the bead as a connective material, as something that strings us together in a community. This is exactly what happens in the making of a bag of an object of this nature. It creates an impromptu community of makers who may not meet again.
And maybe I can do it in English as well. And there is something very important to me as well, is that, when you speak about embroidery, the thread and the beads are the first elements of embroidery that we have, basically. Then you have sequins, you have, paillettes, and many, many other things. But in all the cultures, the main elements are thread and beads, basically. And this is very funny because yesterday I had a conference in Italian in Milano, and we said that today, people don't speak to each other, don't listen to each other, and that language became something very difficult, to create a relationship. And when you think about craft and beads, this is the first natural language. I think this is a language that is totally universal. And when I see all the people in my atelier working together, they don't even need to speak a specific language vocally. They just express physically this language. And this is why it's very funny when I go towards new generations, and they are super excited because this is a way to express themselves which is out of the culture, out of the language, out of the barrier sometime of history, social levels and so on. It's a common language that you have everywhere in the world. So I'm super happy to work on craft, basically, because craft is the first worldwide language of expression and emotion that we can have.
Thank you. I also just want to share one thing, and then we can open up for some questions. When I was traveling around working on an exhibition, this is back in 2012, and I met a number of bead workers and other people too, quill workers, people making quilts, parfleche, clothing, all sorts of things. And one of the things that I really loved was that, it made me realize how involved we are in just parts of transactions in contemporary life. So we don't always know where something comes from, who made it, how long it took, what the environment was it was made in. But there's something about beadwork that you have to actually, when you're putting your needle up through the bottom, say for instance, and you're kind of like, oh, not close enough, oh, too close. And then you've got to do this a few times. You have to make a decision that it's in the right position. Then you put your bead on, and then you have to make a decision where it goes back through again. You have to pull it not to get your thread caught up. That is a transaction. You've just completed something that you had to think about and tell your body and mind what to do. And you get to do that thousands of times. And the more Native people who I met who said that beadwork or craft healed them from addiction or from anxiety or stress or depression was remarkable. Everyone who I met when we were talking to crafters and to artists around the country. And it just really made me realize that that's where many of us, who go into handwork and craft, it is a process of healing in many ways. And it is something that I think when I look at handcrafted things, I feel like it's the result of a kind of catharsis of making.
We both want to say something. So I love that, and I also, love that it's something that you have to be taught, right? That there are very few people who are self-taught. It's something that's this embodied knowledge that, people have, kind of been able to reclaim through studying older materials, but most often it's something that's taught intergenerationally by, moms or aunties or grandmas, and taught, in community contexts. And there's an example. So during the pandemic, I took over a course for a colleague who was sick, and it was when Marie Watt and Chanupa Hanska-Luger were doing their their embroidered bandana project for the exhibition Each Other that went to that started at Denver Art Museum, curated by our friend John Lukovic, and also went to the Peabody Essex Museum with the wonderful Karen Kramer. And where else was it? Emory? At Emory. But instead of having like virtual office hours during the term, their final project was to embroider a piece for this and then to kind of write a reflection on how it related to course concepts. Because I was really interested in kind of how do we like connect to our bodies at a time when every single interaction we're having in a class is virtual and digital, and that people are craving like doing something physical or outdoors or connecting to something that's tangible and not digital. But so instead of having office hours, I had a sewing circle and had students come in and they could work on their pieces. And the first session we had, I also happened to have about half of the Dartmouth men's lacrosse team in my class that term, and a bunch of young Native women. And so seeing them come into this space where the activity was, embroidering, really flipped the power dynamics in the class and in those like sewing circles, where it was the men who were feeling really unsure and uncomfortable because it was something they'd never done before. And the Native women were like, I got this, I know how to do this. This is the best class project I've ever had. And there's this one young man who was like, okay, I've got my materials, got my thread and my needle. What do I do next? I said, well, you thread the needle. And he's like, what? He's like, I've heard about that as like throwing a good football pass, but what do you mean thread the needle? I was like, well, there's a little hole. It's called the eye at the top of the needle. And he looks and he goes, oh shit, there really is a hole in that. And he threaded it, and it was just like, how do you become like a 20-year-old adult human being and not like, which was funny, but it also like is that because we are so far removed from these processes that, we don't have these skills, we don't need them. And so, but it also like created a community in a way where, people were put in positions of power and in relation to their peers that they hadn't otherwise experienced. But also having like several people who didn't know what they were doing, learning together and seeing that other people were struggling with the same thing, encouraged them to kind of like keep trying. And was really kind of empowering for them to see that, oh, other people are making the same mistakes and having to undo something and do it over. And I think we've lost that in a lot of educational spaces.
It's actually why I teach a beading class. And there was resistance to me being at Amherst College teaching, painting, drawing, these were all fine. Beading? And I said, yes. Really what I'm teaching them is community. Really what I'm teaching them is about the embodiment of knowledge. And so what I do in my class is that I'll teach 4 of you a technique, and 4 of you a technique, and 4 of you a technique, and then the next class, and you have to learn it, because you're going to teach each other. So I become irrelevant. And they want to transfer that knowledge. And they have this sort of pride. And they'll say, oh, so-and-so over here is forgetting how to do that Ndebele technique. And who are my experts? I'm an expert. Seeing that is a beautiful thing. I would say I have seen a change depending on where I have taught, even class by class, who knows how to thread a needle or not. I have taught everyone, including some people in this audience, how to thread a needle the way my grandmother Chummy threaded a needle. It's a very specific way. It works. So the embodiment from that ancestor who taught me how to is now in all of this next generation and multiple generations of people that I've taught, and I love that, right? That ancestral knowledge being shared. My Chummy is in their fingertips, right? Such a beautiful thing. Jeffrey, tell us a little bit about, do you have a technique that you're particularly interested in learning, or that felt natural when you started it, one of the other?
Jamie, and I said this to Sonia last night, and she gave me an odd look, but that Jamie said, I've never heard you refer to yourself as a bead worker. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I understand I do use beads in my work. But I think I use beads much like I use anything else. It's just, instead of glue, it's string, sewing it on. But I think these birds, like the birds, or anything that serves like a sampler that really just enables me to just experiment with beads, experiment with color. I mean, the birds, some of them, I remember as they were getting completed in the studio, the way the color works in them, we'd all come in and we'd be like, wow, I feel like I'm tripping. And because the color and the way that the color overlaps with each other in this three-dimensional kind of fringy experience that's happening. So those are really my favorite things. We've done some sequins and beads for some new pieces that we're working on, but it's really experimentation. But no, nothing in particular. It's really, I'd love that we could do it faster, but it's like, that's not going to happen. But well, it's okay if we open up for some questions from people? Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to say this additional thing is that one of the things that I tell my students, it's one thing to get the skill, but it's until you actually know how to improvise, you actually have not added to that archive. Right. So it's like you have to learn it, and then you have to do something else with it. Like you have to bring your own juice to it.
Yeah.
So that I'd love to hear you say that that's the thing that you enjoy.
That is what I enjoy. Yeah, I think it's, and it took a long time until I felt comfortable. I think the things that we do are certainly looking at raised beadwork was one, square stitches, occasionally a peyote stitch, and then single stitch beading. Yeah. So I don't know if we have you could take this one. Please let us know for questions.
But I have a question for you, Sonia, by the way. Now, it was very interesting to see, because you use a needle to place the beads, basically. Did you try to do it with a hook, for example? Crochet, yeah. You do it?
Have I done crocheted beadwork before? Yes.
Okay.
You would be hard-pressed to name a kind of beadwork that I haven't done. Really?
Okay. So think of questions. But one thing that we didn't get to, which I said in my remarks that I hoped we would get to, because it was brought up on the first panel, was kind of like building coalition and solidarity among, Black and Indigenous folks. And at the beginning of your remarks, you talked about how, this nation was founded on the dispossession of Indigenous land and the enslavement of, African descended captives. And we met actually 2 summers ago now through a really great convening hosted by the Indigo Arts Alliance at Haystack, where it was like summer camp for Black and Indigenous people. It was like art summer camp, and it was, the cabins were a little more rugged than I have gotten accustomed to. But we made art together, we ate incredible meals together. And it is something that I like am consistent, like, I want to do more with this. I want to do more with this. But there are these barriers, kind of institutional and perceived, that kind of prevent us from doing this work. And so, and if you have thoughts, or Jeffrey, if you have thoughts on, kind of working across kind of communities and with, non-native folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think even with the pavilion, it was important to me that we really brought in people from all different backgrounds. I mean, to me, I think this is going to be increasingly important as we go forward. I think even just within the Native individuals that I know, so many of us have many different ancestries within us, and I think about my children and their ancestry, and it's very difficult for me to speak about heritage in any sort of singular way. I think being absolutely honest, in my family, my father is from Mississippi. I have no doubt that we have African blood flowing through my body. The Deep South in the 40s and 50s, the amount of racism that was there and still is there, simply was a game of survival. And so some of those arms of our family tree have not been fully fleshed out. And certainly in urban environments that I've grown up in, Black communities are really the ones that I've been drawn to and that have embraced me. I have no hesitation about acknowledging all of the influences from Black American histories that have really taught me so many things. So I think, as we're looking forward, I think to say that we're in many different crises points in all different levels, it's just true. It's where we're at. And as far as I'm concerned, it's going to take the best of our minds. It's going to take the most engaged people to come together and to find ways to work together civilly, hopefully peacefully. It doesn't mean that we can't have differences. It doesn't mean that we can't disagree, that we can't be passionate about our disagreements as well. But ultimately, if we don't support each other, I mean, it is a race against time. I don't know who said that earlier today, but I think it's frightening. It's frightening for me, for sure. And we're already at a place that I can't believe where we're at. So, and I think that's why it was important for this particular panel up here today. This is certainly the people who have been important in my life and who have been supportive of me, I think, with well awareness that this is the way that I see things. In art exhibitions and curatorial, I know there's many non-Native curators who are nervous about including Native artists in their exhibitions, in commenting and critiquing the work. It is important to take those risks and to take those chances. And even if people get upset, critique is always going to incite some degree of upset. But I think hopefully what it leads to is people maybe affirming themselves even more and saying, coming up with like the reasons why this is the way they feel. But what I love about being an artist and a lot of the worlds that I work in is they are of the real world, but they are not the real world. They are manufactured bubbles that we can propose, we can try things out, we can fail, we can succeed and create new models, but they're of the real world. They are not representative of necessarily the way the world works. And that's, I think, what's given me a place in life, to be quite honest, since I was a child. It was the place that I looked at and I thought, oh, well, I could potentially be normal in that world,
Jeffrey, I also just want to say, as Jamie mentioned Indigo Arts Alliance, I was just thinking about when we first met, it was actually because of a bead artist by the name, well, she's many things, Joyce Scott, another MacArthur Fellow, you know, genius folk. And she invited the three of us, the two of us, to be in conversation with a curator. And from then I decided you were my kin.
Yad shik eroshiden todichin inslando Kenyani bashchin shiche ejalagi arot khachini erashinale she Renee Watchman Yunisha. Good morning, it's or afternoon. I have a complicated thought, and I was trying to flesh it out as you were speaking, but my question is about access to these beautiful creations in terms of economical stability, but also in terms of just cultural knowledge. So, you know, you have to not be impoverished to be able to afford a lot of beadwork, you know, and I think that makes it inaccessible for some people. When I'm thinking of accessibility as well, as I teach at McMaster University, and students often don't have the resources financial to purchase these things, so they want to make them, but they don't have the cultural knowledge to make them. So every week there's a beading class that is hosted by our Indigenous Student Center, which is great, but the but is not that. It's they offered 1 week a beading session for beading condoms because they wanted to make it a dual process, you know, to educate about, you know, safe sex, educational sex, but beading the rims of condoms. And they just got so much hate and backlash. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are. You know, I think it's one thing to think about beadwork as an art form, but also to think about the accessibility that beadwork should have for Indigenous peoples. Yeah.
I mean, I can start. I mean, first of all, I couldn't afford one of these bags. It wouldn't make sense for me to spend the money of what it costs. And that's not the reason why I chose to do it. The reason why I chose to do it was because, again, I think I'm just focused on putting myself in spaces where I haven't seen us before. I think that, you know, for instance, there's a young designer who graduated from IAIA, Jonte Kom, and I love how he just says, I'm going to be the creative director of Alexander McQueen. And that's how he introduced himself to me. And I thought, you probably will be. If not Alexander McQueen, you will be the creative director of something. Because I can tell, as an artist, as a creative person, there's no plan B. And that's usually what I tell people. It's like, it is not an equitable world. It is not just. If you wait for an equitable world and just that invites you in, you will never go there. It just doesn't happen. It is a world that you fight your way into. And I don't think I've ever known a single creative person who hasn't had that experience. It is exhausting. It's tiring. I'm sure you could talk about your own experience of that. I don't think there was ever any other choice for me as to what I would do. I think about who I was 25, 30 years ago and how much I was not in a good place, you know, and my pursuit of what I have done has been one of, it's like desperation, like sheer desperation of having to create and carve a niche out for myself where I felt normal and sane. That's what's driven me to do this, and to try to bring other people along with me. And then something like this, what's happening here today, is also sending out invitations to those people who I actually also feel normalized around. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you, but some of the most financially insolvent people I've ever met are bead workers. I think sometimes, and I've been a teacher for 25 years, and I see the student who claims to not have money to buy, you know, art materials wearing sneakers that cost $250. I understand the unfairness and the frustration of unfairness, but I do know that I've seen people figure it out. And that's one of the biggest things I could ever say to artists. I wish I could make the world fair for you, but I can't. The one thing I can say is if you know that this is what you want to do, start where you can. There's no step that's too small, that's negligible. You can always make the steps smaller. You know, I learned how to bead and how to, I would say I'm kind of self-taught, but there was a woman, Menominee woman who I worked with in my 20s in Chicago, Mavis Nakanish, and she was part, do you know her? Oh yeah. She worked with me and she really took me under her wing and she used to call me Baby Choctaw and she'd be like, come on, Baby Choctaw. And she'd take me to her house, she'd make me dinner, she taught me how to sew, she taught me how to tan a hide on the roof of her co-op in Chicago. And I think, you know, the ways that I reach out to people, I think now I'm in a position where I can do that. So for instance, we'll be contributing money to the arts program at the public school on the Choctaw Reservation. I do believe that's a responsibility. When you find yourself in a position and a platform that you can give back, you absolutely should. It is correct and it pays you back. But yeah, that's the answer that I could provide right now.
Can I add, I know the question wasn't particularly directed this way, but I am thinking about how important it is for me to be an educator and how much I learn from my students and the ability to teach them beading techniques. And I teach them a lot, but they couldn't possibly learn everything that I have learned in all of these years. Some of them come with knowledge, so I'm learning from them. But there's just this ability to say, here's a bead, needle, and thread, and you go. You don't need this bag, no offense, do you? They don't need this bag. But it's like you can now make something yourself, right? And what often happens in my classes is that they go around and they say, wait, why is this beaded thing so inexpensive? When they've actually learned the work that it takes to make something. They say, wait, how is this keychain that I know is hand beaded, how is this only $5, $2? I said, yes. How is it? Why is that happening? Let's talk about why that is. And beads become that place where you can have that conversation about what's happening economically in the world. Where is that made? Why is it that inexpensive? Especially now that you know that it didn't just appear in half an hour, that particular kind of beadwork. And so it's empowering in all of those ways that I think makes me want to just keep teaching forever, right? Yeah.
Yeah, can I say something about that? It's about accessibility. Of course, these bags are very, very expensive, we know. But basically, when you think about embroidery, basically, in the past, it was like a common thing that everybody knows to learn, basically, as when you are doing, you are cooking, repairing things, and so on. Later on, with the mass production, people don't need anymore to learn embroidery. There's no need, you just have to buy into the mass market, some very cheap things, and so on. And this was the beginning in the 1920s of the disappearance of all the craft that we have in Europe. Basically, in Italy, here, in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, we had like thousands and thousands of craft artisans in embroidery that disappeared because there were no need to build your own clothes, basically. And if we didn't have this type of products and the luxury brands that we have in Italy, in France, and so on, all this craft legacy would have totally disappeared because it was useless to have them, basically. And the young generations didn't want it to get into these jobs. So hopefully, when I see this bag, I know it's very expensive, and we are not going to have like 2,000 bags like this in the natures, but basically, you have to see that behind that, we have perpetuated the savoir-faire in France, in Italy, basically. And without that, we wouldn't have all these new generations learning beads embroidery, basically, and this savoir-faire would have disappeared in like 1 minute. So just to give you an idea, and a lot of brand luxury do that. We have built a school of embroidery in France and in Italy to perpetuate this savoir-faire. And now it's very funny because all the people who have been trained to make this bag, when they are at home, with kids, for example, on the weekends, they teach embroidery to their kids, and then the kids go to the school and they did an embroidery on the jacket and so on. So I can see that at the end we are coming back to craft as a popular way of expressing yourself, basically. So yeah, this is elitist, but behind that there is a transmission that is going to popularize this language.
No one brought up the condoms. That was like the most interesting part of the question. You know, in my mind, I was like, okay, so as long as they were saying that this makes the condoms ineffective, I don't see what the problem is. But I can imagine after, you know, having seen other comments in, you know, the realm of native social media about other things, I think some people have attached the meaning of beadwork as, you know, something that can be used for ceremony, something that can become sacred, but in itself is, you know, not sacred, right? And so the use of it as a teaching tool or as something to educate about safe sex practices in a college setting is wonderful, but a lot of people may be uncomfortable with that. And a lot of that is around, you know, the shame that Native people have been made to feel about our bodies and about our sexuality. And those are things that we don't often talk about in our communities and that, you know, are very taboo. And so, you know, people are kind of like projecting those fears onto a situation and kind of like perpetuating those, you know, kind of colonial understandings of sexuality that you know we've internalized onto the situation. But I do think it's great, and you know, I work at Dartmouth College, and the students have a crafting and beading circle, and it's a student-run organization, and it didn't used to be, but now that it is, they can apply for student funding, and that's how they acquire beads. So they get money and they get to buy all the materials so all the students can, you know, kind of use the beads. And then they actually sell it. So then when they sell things that were paid for with Dartmouth money, they then have money they can use to get beads on their own. And it's like really ingenious the way they've kind of gamed the structure to be able to kind of use funds for these purposes. And so I think that like kind of like crafty, in more ways than one, spirit of our people to kind of like find, there's always ways to make these things happen. And, you know, like Jeffrey was saying the other day, you know, even those of us who grew up without means or in poverty, our families didn't close the door to other people and, you know, put food on the table and shared what we had. And, you know, I think that spirit of kind of generosity is something that characterizes so much of the art within our communities. And it's why I really love working with Native artists because of that, not only intellectual generosity, but that kind of recognition of shared humanity that I see lacking in other kind of mainstream art spaces.
Yeah. I think also just one more thing about your question was, I think I've never met a beadworker who wouldn't be thrilled to teach a young person beadworking because you get excited that someone else wants to learn, and you realize that's a rare student who comes to you. But I think also, I think one of the issues is like how once we leave our home communities, how little many of us are normally around other Native people, you know, or in particular elders, or people who have real experience in understanding beadwork. I feel very fortunate that this person, Mavis Nakanish, was in my life, and it's not anything that I knew how to go out and find that person. I just happened to find myself in a circumstance where she came to me and, you know, took me under her wing and brought me into the Native community in Chicago. So I do agree with you. I do think I think what Sonia's doing is incredibly important, and I also think I'm fortunate I'm at a Bard college that I think would support if I came in and said I want to teach beadwork. Bard College would say, sure, yeah, like, yeah. So, but I think that's also a part of the issue, is just sort of how do we connect those people? But I think once they're in the same room, I think the young person would be very fortunate, and teachers love to bring that person in.
Yeah, I have a question about Jeffrey. When you met with us in June, you had some interesting things to say about collaboration, the way you work with folks. I found it really interesting to see the different stages of the process here in terms of conveying the work to Dior. And there were changes, right, that were done. And just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that dynamic, because that's an unusual thing within beadwork to collaborate in that way, either with somebody else, but especially with the, I don't know if it's a power dynamic, but definitely the commercial dynamic of it probably required certain compromises. And I don't often think, I would never think if, for some reason, I don't think you compromise very often. So I'm just wondering if you could say something.
Well, thank you for that. But bizarrely, I have to say, the learning curve was that they'd never said no. That was the learning curve. You guys never said no. And I think, and this is just something that I've thought about, but I don't think that this generates a huge amount of income for Dior. I think it's more of a kind of branding. It's part of the public projection of what Dior wants to put out into the world, like the collaboration with artists. And I think the fact that they didn't come to me as an Indigenous Native American artist was actually kind of a relief, because it meant they came to me because they thought something I do would appeal to this customer, Actually, not even I wouldn't even say to the customer, I would say to this series, which I can tell you Dior sees it as they are, along the lines of artworks more than they are of like my first question was, does someone have to be able to use it? And they didn't say yes, they were like, it was questionable whether it actually had to be usable. And so they gave me a lot of freedoms, and in fact, they surpassed what I came into thinking that I had to dumb down my idea. They actually were the ones who kind of pumped it up a little bit more.
Yeah, I can say just a few words about it. Just to, you are totally right. It's not a marketing project in the sense that when we came to see Jeffrey, we didn't say you have to respect an amount of price for the embroideries. You don't have to respect a specific angle on the bag, so you are totally free. So it's a carte blanche that we give. And by the way, it's a communication project, not a marketing project. And you're totally right, we don't earn money on that basically because the amount, you have to imagine that when we came to see Jeffrey, we have like 2 luggages full of samples based on the works that he did. And even the cost of that, you are speaking about the cost of making embroideries, is super, super costly. And what we earn when we sell the bags doesn't even pay for that. So it's not at all the perspective of the project. The idea is more like in an Andy Warhol thing. I think luxury brands have an impact on new generations. And it's for us a way to convey all the messages about avant-garde, modern creation, craft as well, because we want to have craft into it, and to make this language as popular as a Rihanna song, basically. This is a little bit the idea, is use this bag as a way to impact the mind of the young generations about creativity, freedom, craft, and so on.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, this was touched on a little bit earlier, but now I'm curious. Can you show us how each of you thread a needle? And maybe who taught you?
Well, you start, Sonia. You start on there.
Be careful who you teach. Also, this is going to look a little rude. So I was not taught to thread a needle. I was taught to needle a thread. This is the rude part. Okay, if this is the eye of the needle, instead, how do I do this? Thank you, because I need both hands. Instead of trying to get, this is the rude part, instead of trying to get a long thread into this eye of the needle, you actually hold the thread very, 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 very short between your fingertips, like stubble, like so short you can't even see it. And then you push the eye of the needle over the thread. Chummy.
Yeah, my mom taught me, and I don't know, I always like, even if I don't need to, I always kind of like put it in my mouth first and then, kind of hold it up and push it through. But I'm going to try the chummy method. And yeah.
I'm very bad at it. I don't know even how to embroider a bead, basically. I'm better in nuclear physics and quantics, basically. So, and at the end, atoms and quarks have the same shape, no? It's round, so that's all.
Okay, I'm going to be completely honest with you how I do that, how this happens. So I get the thread, I get a fresh, sharp pair of scissors, I cut it just to make sure I've got all of the fibers held together, lick it, put it through my mouth, I hold the needle up to the light, and then I do this.
One eye.
And every time it ends with me going, can somebody help me with this? And somebody's like, sure. And they come over and they thread the needle.
Okay, Jeffrey.
That is in all
Jeffrey, we're
honesty.
going to have a little private session.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to change your
yeah,
world.
yeah,
I am.
okay.
I promise. Chummy and I are going to change your world.
Beautiful. I need it. Yeah. So I think unless there's one more question, maybe we should wrap up for time's sake. We have one right back here, and then.
Can you hear? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Just going back to the condom, there's actually upstate at the Hassel Museum, so on the Bard campus in upstate New York, there was this indigenous art group show, and there was actually a beaded condom wrap, and I just thought I should say that because maybe some people got mad, but somewhere else that was art. And going back to this idea of, who considers what art? And I just think, I thought it was beautiful. So, yeah.
Hey, I
think
have
so.
a question real quick.
Yeah.
I really love how you all brought up the idea of knowledge being passed through the fingers. That was beautiful, Sonia. And the first person that ever made me think of that was Sarah Seastream. And she bought a pair of earrings from me, and she said, "Ooh, now I have your DNA." And I looked at her because I didn't know her that well yet. And I thought, should I not sell you these earrings, And then she said, "No, but you've been touching it." And then same as you, Jeffrey, and Jamie, she said, "How do you thread your needle? Do you put the thread in your mouth?" And I thought, oh my gosh, my DNA is in the beadwork. And so I just love how this keeps coming up. And I'm wondering if you've had those moments of recognizing that you have imprinted on your art, Jeffrey, and when did you have that moment and what was it like for you?
I think, I think there's an ethical responsibility to telling stories. And I think as an Indigenous person, and in particular knowing so many of the stories of my family, my grandparents and my mother, and my aunts and uncles in particular, I think a lot of what I've learned from those stories is where a lot of the ideas for the work comes from. And so when I talk about ethics and responsibilities of storytelling, it's really that some of those things are not mine to tell. And so I'm always thinking about where that line is, because I think the fact that they shared them with me, they are a part of me, they help shape who I am. But in the retelling of them, it's just not my story to tell. So when work is getting ready to leave the studio, oftentimes I do send it off in some way of asking it to do something out in the world. And so in that sense, yes. And I think with the dancers in particular during Vernissage Week here and dancing through the pavilion, I really feel that really, when it coheres those artworks into one experience in a way which I can't do, it brings them into a different kind of community sense that requires the community to do. And also, it makes them present, and it marks them with a kind of DNA. I would say a spirit, maybe the DNA of spirit, as opposed to necessarily my DNA. Yeah. But I will tell you another thing. A lot of the pieces that get made in the studio, because I do work with the studio team, and I've really begun to believe that when we then send things out in the world, they are manifestations. So I tell them, I remember saying to them one time, you guys should be putting things inside of these things. And then they looked at me and they said, oh, we do. So I know there are things out in the world that are the DNA of other people. So, okay, I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody. Thank you all so much.